Hey guys, welcome to the third video of the AWS playlist, and in this video we will talk about one of the most important AWS services, that is IAM, Identity and Access Management. Why is this the most important? Because no matter which AWS service you use, you will always encounter IAM over there, right? So it's one of the core services. So that is why this video is very important. And I promise I will give you the best possible explanation that is on the internet. So my name is Mohit, you're watching DevOps Studio. So let's get started. Okay, so to understand IAM, you need to understand four basic things. So those are users, policies, roles, and groups. Okay, and I will explain each one of them with a demo in this video. So let's first understand what IAM does. Okay, so IAM is used to give access to other AWS services. Okay, so for example, let's say I have my AWS account, right, and I'm working with some developer who needs access to an S3 bucket. Okay, so I can provide him access through the IAM service. Okay, as it says that it enables secure access to AWS services and resources. Okay, so essentially it handles two things. First is the authentication and the other one is the authorization. Now this is very important. This is one of the basic things, okay, and it's a very common interview question, especially if you are a fresher. So let's understand these two topics first before we move on to the users and the groups. Okay, so what is authentication? Authentication says whether you are allowed to enter the system or not. Okay, so you must have used applications such as Instagram and Snapchat, right? So while logging in, they ask you for a username and password, correct? So that you can be authenticated, so that the server knows that what's your identity or whether you are a legit user or not, right? So when you give your credentials, you log in, that is called authentication. On the other hand, authorization means that once you are inside the system, now what are the things that you can do? What are your roles and responsibilities? So to summarize this, let me give you an example. Let's say you work in a company, right? So you go there every day. So on the main gate, you punch your card, right? You present your ID and the door opens and you enter the building, right? This is called authentication. You are authenticated to enter that building because you presented your ID card, and in case of a software it will be a username, password, a certificate or a key, right? So once you are inside the building, what can you do? As a developer, you will access your laptop, your other assets like mouse, keyboard, maybe a coffee machine, right? But some other people might have different roles, right? For example, let's say there is a cashier, right? So cashier will have a different set of roles, right? You cannot just go to your office and tell the cashier that, hey, from this day onwards, I will do your job, right? You are not authorized to do that, right? So similarly, in case of software, these two things play a major role. Authentication decides whether you can enter a system or not, and authorization means once you are inside the system, now what you can do, okay, like your roles and the policies, the permissions you have. And I can bet that this is the easiest explanation you will ever find on the internet on this particular topic. How does AWS handle these things? So let's first talk about the authentication. So for authentication, we have multiple ways, but one of them is IAM users. Okay, so let's take a look at what is a user. Okay, so user is nothing but a unique account, right, that is given to a specific person or even an application through which you can access AWS resources. Okay, so now let me go back to the AWS console that we created in the last video, and let us create a user. Okay, so let's create a user. So this is our AWS. Go to the IAM service. If you do not see it here, you can also go to the search bar and put IAM and go from there. Let's assume that there is a new developer in my team called Steve. okay, and Steve needs access to an S3 bucket. Okay, so we are going to give him access through an IAM user. So on the left side, you see different options like groups, roles, policies. So let's click on users. And as you can see right now, we do not have any user. So click on create user. Let's give it a name, Steve. And now there is an additional option that says provide user access to the AWS management console. Now what you see on the screen, the UI, this is called the AWS management console. Okay, so if you do not click this option, then he might not be able to log in. Okay, he can still use the CLI, like he can type in AWS commands, right? But he will not be able to see that. So let's click on this. For now, we will use, I want to create an IAM user, and now it's asking you for a password. So you can either auto generate a password or you can also provide a custom password. Okay, so let's auto generate one. Okay, and another option that says user must create a new password at the next sign in, which is recommended. So what will happen is once we create this user, this AWS will send an email to them asking them to reset their password. Okay, so let's do that. Let me change the camera angle and click on next. And now it's asking you for permissions, like what kind of roles and permissions you want to give to Steve. So as of now, we will not give him anything. Okay, we will go with the default settings. So let's click on next. Then again, click on create user. But before that, you see, even though we did not attach any permission, it's still giving him a default permission that says IAM user change password. Because once he gets that email, he will have to change his password. So that is why he needs that permission. Okay, so it is by default. Sure. So now let's click on create user, and the user has been created. And as you can see, this is the console sign in, the URL where he can go and log in. This is the username and this is the password. So now you have two more options. You can either download this as a CSV and share with him over an email or through whatever chat medium you have, or you can also directly email him through this. So for now, I will not send an email, so I will directly use it from here. So for that, let's copy this console URL and let's open another incognito window and let's log in as Steve. Okay. So since we are here, now it's asking for a username and password. So for the username, it's Steve, and let's go back and copy the password. So put in the password and sign in. So as you can see, during the first login, it's asking Steve to change the password. Okay, so let's do that. Let's push the old password and let's put a new password. Confirm password change. And in just a couple of seconds, it is done. Okay, so now Steve is inside the account, right? Let's change the region to US East 1. So till now, we have only completed the authentication part. Okay, as you can see, Steve can log in, but he does not have any permissions. Okay, that is why on the dashboard, you see these errors, right? Access denied to service catalog, access denied for cost, right? So similarly, you will see these errors no matter which service you go to. Okay, so as a test, let's go to S3. Let's go to S3. So as you can see right now, there are no buckets. So let's see. So you see now we cannot even see the buckets. We cannot know that whether there are 0 buckets or 100 buckets, right? Because Steve that does not have access. So let's go back to the root account and try the same thing. Let's go to S3. I'm going to open it in a new tab. And let's see if it shows us the same error or not. Let's go to buckets. And no, it's showing 0 buckets. Why? Because we are the root user. Okay, we have full access. Okay, but Steve does not have access. So We can give him access, but before that, let's create a bucket. And let's call it test Steve bucket. Let's call it test Steve bucket. It's a general purpose block or public access. Remaining everything we can keep as default. We will talk about each one of them when we talk about S3 in the upcoming video. But for now, let's click on create bucket. Okay, so now we have our test bucket, test Steve bucket. So now let's go back to Steve's perspective and see if he can see that bucket or not. So let's do a refresh, and as expected, he still doesn't have the permission to list the bucket. Okay, so let's give him permission to do that. Let's go back to the root account and go to users. Let's open this. Let me download this CSV first, and let's go to view user. So as you can see, this is the user Steve. Okay, so how to open it? Go on the left side, click on users, and you will see Steve. Okay, click on that. So over here, you will see that it has that default permission to change the password. And if you click on this plus icon, you will see the policy. Okay, this is what we call a JSON policy document. Okay, so before we read about this, let me explain you what a policy document looks like. Okay, so that you can have a better idea. Okay, so this is the policy document. Let me go in full screen and let me show you. So IAM policies are basically documents in JSON format that specifies like which resource you can access or what kind of access you have. Okay, so it's like a certificate that you give to AWS and ask for permissions. Okay, so it has just two main points. One is the version, so this can be anything, and the other main thing is the statement. So as you can see, the statement is actually an object. Okay, so whenever you see a square bracket, you know it's an object, right? So the first object is this one. Okay, this is the first object and it only has one object. So what does it say? It says effect allow. That means we are allowing something. Okay, it can also be deny, but in this case we are allowing. And what is the action? Action says we can list the buckets on S3 and we can also get the objects inside that bucket. Okay, now which bucket? That is decided by the resource. Okay, so the resource says test Steve bucket. Okay, so this is the ARN. Okay, so let me explain you what is ARN. So whenever you create any resource on AWS, it allocates it an ARN, which is nothing but a unique identification for that resource. Okay, so ARN for test Steve bucket will look something like this. Okay, and as you can see, there's another entry, but over here we have a star also. Okay, that means all the objects inside the bucket. Okay, so that means we can list that bucket and we can also get all the objects that are inside that test Steve bucket. Okay, so let us assign the same exact policy to Steve. So let's go back, go to Steve. So how to add policies? You see a button over here that says add permissions. Click here. So now you have two options. Either you can give your own inline policy, you can write that JSON, or you can also add the inbuilt permissions. Okay, so let's try that. So over here you have multiple options like adding to group, copying permissions, or attach policy directly. So click on here. So over here you will see all the inbuilt policies that are provided by AWS. Okay, and as you can see, there are like 1314 policies. That's a lot. Okay, so but what we can do is we can search, right? So let's search for S3 and see what do we get. There you go. So as you can see, we have a bunch of S3 policies. Amazon S3 full access, that will give full access to anything in S3. Then S3 read only, S3 tables full access. Okay, so for this video, let's pick read only policy. Okay, so what it will do, it will allow what actions to get the S3 objects, list those objects, describe them, okay, and on which resource, star, that means all the resources. Okay, so let's temporarily use this policy and I will explain you how you can make it better. Okay, so let's click on this and go next and click on add permissions, and it is done. So as you can see, now Steve has two policies. So now he should be able to see that bucket. So let's go back to the Steve's account and let's do a refresh, and boom, there you go. As you can see, he can now see that bucket, and that error is no longer there. Okay, and he can even open the bucket and see the objects that are inside because we provided that permission. But let's say Steve wants to upload anything, right? So what do you think will happen if Steve try to upload something? Will it work or not? Pause the video and comment down yes or no. Okay, I hope you are done. So let's try that. So let's go to upload and let's pick any file. Let's pick this photo of a brick wall. Okay, and let's try to upload it. And no, red, right? Why? Because access denied, as it says, right? Why? Because we did not give upload permissions or put permissions to Steve. Okay, he can only view. Okay, so now let me go back to the root account and let's upload the same brick wall. And since I am on the root account, I will be able to upload this. Perfect. So now that brick wall is inside that bucket, as you can see, now we have one object, and that is the image. Now let's go back to Steve's account and let's see if he can see that or not. Let's do a refresh, and obviously he can see it, right? Because we did give him the list permission for that bucket, right? Now there is an issue with this approach, right? Because if you go back to Steve and check the policy, then this policy allows listing every bucket, okay? Because it's a star, right? So Steve can access any bucket that is inside your S3, right? So, and this is a security risk, right? Why? Because Steve might be accessing other buckets which he's not supposed to. Maybe I also have some production data over here, right? So I do not want people to tamper with that data, okay? And this is where the golden tip comes into play, okay? Let me tell you what that is. Drum roll. So there is a principle called principle of least privilege, okay? And this is one of the core concepts when it comes to IAM, and I cannot stress enough how important this is. And I will make a separate video related to security, but you must remember the principle of least privilege when it comes to IAM, okay? And what does it mean? It means that you must give the least amount of permissions to a person or a service that gets the job done, okay? Don't be lazy, don't give full access to people, okay? I know it will do the job, but it is a big security risk. It will be a red flag through one of the security systems, okay? So what we have to do now is fine grain Steve's policy so that he can only view that bucket which we want him to view, okay? So let's go here. So I'm going to remove this, okay? Let's remove this. So this time I'm going to add an inline policy, which is a different type. So instead of selecting add permissions, click on create inline policy and go to JSON, and over here I'm going to paste a simple policy, and you can easily Google these policies. They are very easy, simple. So as you can see over here, I have three statements. The first statement allows listing all the buckets that is associated with that user. So it says list all my buckets. Remember, not all buckets, but all my buckets. Then Another action to list the bucket and get the bucket location. Resource is restricted to Steve's own bucket. Okay, then another one to get the object, and for that we have / and star. That means he can get objects from within the bucket itself. Okay, so he can see what is inside the bucket. Okay, so let's go here, let's click on next. Let's give it a name, Steve S3 read only policy. Always try to give it a meaningful name. Click on create policy, and let's go back to Steve's account to see if he can view the buckets or not. So now as you can see, he can see both the buckets, but if you go to test Steve bucket, you will see that he can see the object. But if you go to the new bucket that we created and open it, you will see he will get the error that you do not have the permissions. Okay, so Steve only has access to his bucket and not all the buckets. So coming back to the policies, in AWS you have two type of policies. First is the AWS managed. Those are the inbuilt policy, the same 1300 policies that I showed you. So those policies will have this orange logo in front of them, and some policy will not have that because those are customer inline. That means created by us, that we just did. Okay, so now let's talk about another scenario. Let's say instead of just one developer, you now have 10 developers, okay, and your team who needs similar permissions. Okay, so what will you do? Will you like go to each user and copy paste the permissions? You can do that, but there is a better way, and that way is called IAM groups. Okay, and as the name suggests, group is nothing but a collection of users, which makes it easier to manage. Okay, so what we can do is we can just create a developer group and add all our developers on it, and whatever policy we attach to the group, that policy will be available to each and every member. Okay, so it's very easy and straightforward. So let's go back to IAM, and on the left side go to groups. So as you can see right now I do not have any groups, so let's create a group. Let's call it dev, and now it's asking you which users you want to add. So let's click on Steve, and what's the permission that we need to assign. So for now let's pick any policy. Let's again select that read only S3 policy. Click on create user group. So now we have the group. As you can see, group name is dev, and if you open it, you will see Steve is a member of that, and you will also see the permissions. And again, if you want, you can also create your own inline policy and not use a very generic policy. Okay, so it's a good practice to use custom made policies which follow the principle of least privilege. Okay, so let's say another developer comes into the team. What will we do? We again go to users, create a user for him. Let's say his name is Ram. Let's create a user for Ram and go next. Now it's asking whether we want to add Ram to a group or not. Okay, so we can select it from here itself. Let's select dev, do next, create user. Let's download this and let's return to users. So now we have two users inside this dev group. Okay, so this is how you can manage your groups. So let's say you have a different group for QAs, you might have a different group for the front-end guys, different group for the admins. Okay, so this is a really good approach to manage your IAM users. Now let's talk about the last concept of today's video, but a very, very important concept, that is called IAM roles. Okay, so as you can tell so far, what we are creating are users and their credentials. Okay, so these are long-term credentials, right? Because we are getting that key, right? Access key and secret key and the passwords, right? So, but what about what if I just want to do temporary access to someone? Like, let's say I have a service which needs to access S3, let's say just once a day. Okay, so for that purpose, you can create the user again, but there's a better approach, and that is called an IAM role. Okay, which are used to give temporary access without long-term credentials. Okay, so that improves the security. Okay, because let's say you do not have roles, right? Then you have to create users for each and every service, right? So you have now a lot of credentials to manage. Okay, so this is where roles come into play. So to explain a role, right, let's say you want to go out and catch a criminal, right? Then what kind of role would that be? That would be a police, right? That would be a police role. Now let's say you want to, there is a fire incident, right, and you want to extinguish that fire, right? So what role is more suitable? The fire brigade or the firefighter role, right? So why? Because those roles have like some responsibilities and some things that they are allowed to do, right? I cannot go catch a culprit because I'm not police, right? So similarly, IAM roles work the same way, right? You can create a role that allows to do something, and that role can be then assumed by a user or any other service. Okay, so let's take an example. So this time, instead of creating a user for S3 access, we will create a role. Okay, so let's go back to the root account. On the left side, click on roles. As you can see, we have just 2 default roles. So let's click on create role. So now, since we need to give access to a user, right? So over here, we'll select custom trust policy. And over here, you will see an option to add a principal. So principal is just the service or the user that will use that role. Okay. So let's click on that. And in the drop down, let's select IAM user. And yeah, let's put the user as Steve, and the account number is over here. So the account is here, the user is Steve. Let's add that principal and let's click on next, and let's again assign that same read-only policy. Click on next. Let's give it a meaningful name. S3 read-only role, and let's click on create role. So the role has been created. So to test this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to users, go to Steve, and first of all remove his permission for the S3, right? And he's also out of that group now. So as you can see in the group, I also only have Ram now. Okay, since I removed that policy, so that automatically puts him out of the group as well. So let's go back to Steve's account. So as you can see now, Steve cannot see the buckets again, sadly, because we removed the permissions, right? So now Steve will assume this role, okay, and he will be able to see the buckets. So how you can do that? Go to the top right section, click on switch role, and over here we need to give the account ID. So let's go here, let's copy the account ID and let's put it here. Now we need the role name. So what's the role name? Role name is this S3 read only role. Let's put it here and let's click on switch role. So now Steve has assumed that role, and as you can see, he can again see the buckets. So let me show you how this works. Okay, so let's go back to the role. So over here you see the usual permission that you see with the user, right? But you also see a trust relationship, and it says that this principal, that is the AWS user Steve, okay, that is the principal. So he's allowed to take this action, and the action is STS assume role. STS is another AWS service that stands for security token service, and it is responsible for generating temporary tokens and return it to the role. Okay, so when Steve assumes that role, internally AWS IAM role goes to STS and requests a temporary credential, comes back and gives that credential to Steve. So now Steve can see the buckets by assuming that role. Okay, and that permission is only valid as long as Steve is assumed with that role. As soon as Steve switch back or he assumes another role, he will lose access to that bucket. So as you can see, that makes it really secure and gives temporary access. If you have a service that needs access to a AWS service temporarily, so this is where you will use IAM role and not an IAM user. Okay, and to give access, like long-term access to different team members and all, for that purpose you will use IAM users. So this was it for today's video. If you liked it, please like the video and subscribe to the channel, because we will be bringing on more content around AWS. We will continue this course, and we also have Azure course, so please watch that as well. And thanks for watching. Have a nice day.